Hello everyone, and welcome to the Geeky Gaming Guild. This is Caleb. Today we're going to be bringing you some N5 Infinity the Game content. We're going to be going over one of the new sectorial armies that is available in the Operation Sandtrap 2-player battle pack. We're going to be talking about the Kestrel Colonial Force. The first thing we're going to take a look at is the full roster of available units to the KCF. They have Fini Fuseliers, which is going to be the basic line troop for the army. They have the Drummers, which is going to be another higher availability line troop, I believe. We have the BCA Magistrates, which we don't know a whole lot about yet. I'm assuming medium infantry. We have the Blink team, which we'll take a look at in a bit. The Banshees, which is a Sandtrap unit. We have the Black Air, another one of the Sandtrap units. We have Fireflies, which we'll look at later. We have the Griffin troop, which is the lieutenant choice provided in the Operation Sandtrap box. We have Hetkari shooters, which we'll take a look at. We have a Father Knight, which is a throwback to a previous unit that used to be in Pan-Oceania. I'm very happy to see them coming back. We have the Squalos Mark II, which is finding a new home here in KCF. We have the Tick Belong, which is also a tag finding a new home. We have the Red Eye, which is supposed to be the new drone for the army. We have the Scarecrow, another Sandtrap unit. And then we have the Mines Core Jackals. Unfortunately, I don't know much about them yet. Looking forward to learning more. And then we have access to a War Core. In terms of remotes, you have the typical array of remotes you would have access to in Pan-Oceania. You have the Pathfinder, Sierra, Clipper, and Fugazi drawn bots. We have the Bulleteer and Peacemaker arm bots. And of note on the availability of those, I do want to point out that you are allowed a single Flash Pulse bot. We have 2 of the Forward Observer bots, and then you're allowed 2 Sierras and 1 Clipper. So kind of interesting to me, though, on the spread of those. I wish we could have access to 2 Fugazis in this army, considering that I'm wanting to take a tag and would like to have cheap orders, but it is what it is. It looks like we have availability 2 on the PAL bots, the little servants for our engineer and doctor specialists. You have access to 2 of the baggage bots, the mule bots. You have access to 1 trauma doc and 1 machinist, although to be entirely honest with you, I don't think either of them will probably see a whole lot of play in this sectorial unless you just don't have the points. You have the tech bees. You're allowed 1 of those in the army, and then you're allowed both of the Fusilier named characters by Pandra and Richard Quinn, which we'll talk more about them on the next part. We have Dart, one of the Aleph allies available to the army, as well as Maximus. And then we have a new named character, which we have not seen yet, called Dr. Priya Harper. Looking forward to seeing what she does in the game. And then you have access to the Yamabushi. That is the mercenary-esque unit that is included in Operation Sandtrap that can work for KCF or JSA. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the fire teams that are available to KCF. So KCF has some really cool fire team options, but if this is what we are going to be looking forward to as an example of the offerings to all the armies in N5, I definitely feel like we've definitely cut down on some of the options you would potentially see. So the fact that you only have access to a single core fire team that is even an option with this army makes me wonder what we'll be seeing in some of the other fire team charts. So your main core fire team in KCF is going to be a team of, it says Finnick fire team, but it's basically your Fusilier fire team. So the units that count for purity in this type of fire team will be obviously your Finnick Fusiliers. You're allowed to include 1 Griffin troop that doesn't break purity, and you can also include either or both of the named Fusilier characters by Pandra and Richard Quinn. I think this is probably this combination, and then potentially including the Black Air or the Magistrate, will be a very, very strong 5-man core fire team. I intend to likely use it as a defensive core, including that way I can include the Black Air Sniper. That way it can potentially, assuming rules is written in what we know so far, I believe it could end up getting to a burst 2.5, if you want to call it that, in ARO, and I think that could be really strong. And then we also have access to some fairly strong gunfighters with the addition of being able to use a Griffin as one of the gunfighting pieces in that fire team, as well as Richard Quinn, I think, could get some use there. And then by Pandra, it just feels like a strong specialist option that you can include in that fire team without breaking purity. So we'll see how that ends up going. And I guess we should also mention that you can have a Harris team version of the Finnick fire teams, but unless you're starved for points, I'm not sure how useful that will be. Then again, with how the purity bonuses work now, maybe a 3-man fire team would be more useful in our list building than a core team. So I guess we'll find out. The other main fire team we have access to with this army that I think will be used a lot is the Kestrel fire team. So this fire team is very interesting to me. It includes mostly powerful pieces. We'll discuss, we don't know the exact specifics of the Firefly unit yet, or the Hetkari, but we can assume they're fairly strong. The Hetkari only has AVA2, and from what we'll look at in a little bit, it appears to be a heavy infantry option. And then we already know that the Griffin is the KCF basically equivalent of an orc troop, so they're another heavy infantry option. There doesn't seem to be a weak link in this fire team, so I'm not surprised that they capped it at Harris, although I'm wondering how useful the Duo and Harris versions of this team will be. One thing that I am a little unsure of with how N5 and the Purity will work is I do not actually 100% know if a double Griffin Duo would count as level 2 Purity on a Kestrel fire team. I'm assuming that since we know the asterisk means you have to have one of those as like your mandatory piece. That's how it worked with N4. If I had 2 Griffins, it would count as Purity 2, but I'm not 100% sure that's exactly how it's going to work until I've seen the official rules of the fire teams. So we'll see how good the Kestrel fire teams end up being. I think they're going to be fairly strong. And I definitely think I'm going to include a Kestrel fire team, maybe even more often than a Finnick fire team in my lists. And then we have one of the fire team options for this army I'm very excited to try out, and that's going to be the armored duos. This is a lot of options for a tag duo fire team, because not only does this army have access to 5 different wildcards, they have 5 different units that they can use in this duo to begin with. As long as you include one of the tags, you have quite the variety of who the second fire team member is. You have access to the Tick Belong with a second tag, or the Squallow with a second tag, or you could have either of them with Maximus, you could have either of them with a Firefly, or either of them with a Bulletier, and then or with one of the wild cards. Now, without knowing a little bit more information, I think there are some of these combinations that just make more sense in my opinion. I think pairing one of the tags with a Bulletier that will assumingly be able to keep up with it speed-wise would be fairly smart. I think maybe including one of them with a Firefly so that they can carry around an Engineer would be smart. But then I also like the idea of potentially having something like just a cheap specialist, like maybe Richard Quinn following one around. So we'll see what the actual points and profiles look like, but I think it could be an interesting element to bring. Another option we have, and then the final actual just different fire team we have for KCF are the Coal Corp fire teams. Now, these are made up of the 2 units that we haven't got any information on yet when it comes to KCF. I'm very, very intrigued to see what they end up being able to do or what they even are. And so once we know more information about them, I'll share that in a future video going over the army. Now, the wild cards. I want to briefly discuss them before we move on and kind of talk about where I think they'll be most useful. So the Crux fire team option, that's going to be our Father Knight fire team option. I feel like he is, depending on his speed, he could potentially find a home in the armored fire team with the duo if he has an equal first speed stat to one of our tags. That could be useful, but that sounds like a lot of points, so I'm unsure. Wondering if he's going to end up being a better lieutenant to throw in the Finnick fire team than the Griffin, but since that would break purity, I'm unsure. The Pathfinder Drawnbot as a wild card, I'm actually fairly excited about. I actually think that could be a really cool addition into the Kestrel Harris teams, or in a duo version of it, tagging along with a Firefly. We have Bipandra and Richard Quinn, which I'll talk about together since they are fairly similar, since they're both pure and Finnick and Kestrel teams. I think they are the wild cards I will end up using the most, just due to the fact that they don't break purity. And then you have Dr. Priya Harper, which will have a fire team option implied by this chart. I'm looking forward to seeing what she brings to the team. As of right now, we don't even know what she does, whether she's a specialist, a melee specialist, or some kind of gunfighter. We're yet to know. So once we know more, we'll be able to discuss her better. And with that, let's go ahead and talk about the actual units that are included in the Operation Sandtrap box specifically, and then how I plan to start building and playing the army once things come out and once I'm able to get access to all the information we'll need. So what comes in the KCF side of the box is a Griffin with an HMG, a Black Air with a multi-sniper rifle, a Scarecrow with a boarding shotgun, a Banshee with a light shotgun, and 3 Fini Fuseliers, all carrying combi rifles. Now, obviously remember that Infinity is a proxy-friendly game, so we could use these as the other profiles for the unit with no issue, and no one's going to give you really a hard time about that. So you definitely could play some of the other options we're about to look at here momentarily, but some of these are probably best used just as what they are. So I'm very excited about that, because me personally, I tend to prefer playing things as what they're actually modeled as much as possible. So this box actually makes me feel good about that. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the individual units included in the box. So the first one we'll discuss is the Fini Fuseliers. I'm definitely getting a lot of Acontecimento regular vibes from this unit, especially in the fact that a lot of their stats are fairly similar. I wish they would have retained the Willpower 13. That would have made me like them even more, but I still am fairly happy with what we have. One of the big things to point out is that why they're different from a basic Fusilier is that they have terrain desert, and that they are supposed to be a terrain or board style specific Fusilier that is slightly an upgrade to regular Fusiliers. Points wise, I'm assuming they're going to be roughly the same, but I hope that some of these actual profile options are different enough from the basic Fusilier that it makes them worth potentially even using in vanilla. I believe you have access to both in that. So what we have here that I think is kind of the main things that I want to point out as their main strengths are going to be their cost. They're definitely fairly priced, I feel. Their ballistic skill is good for line infantry, which is notorious of Fusiliers to begin with. And then their BTS being 3, I think is fine for a line troop, especially one as cheap as them. Some of the weaknesses, though, are obviously they have traditional Pano willpower, so that's a bit of an issue. The lack of armor means that we're going to be probably wanting to put them in cover a lot of the time. And then the average physique means that, and the average physical means they're not really going to be dodging super consistently. 50% of the time is usually not odds I like to go for with dodging. So let's go ahead and talk about the profiles that I think will be very useful. I think that the missile launcher is going to be kind of your go-to support weapon option. I think that the triangulated fire one with the Thunderbolt +1 burst, as well as Mine Layer shock mines, for 0 SWC, that one feels really strong. I feel like that one is one I might end up using and ending up liking a lot. Especially if I start moving down to a Harris or a 3-man team, I might want to have that be one of the 3. I also like the Hacker, even though it's only WIP12. The fact that it has BTS 3, I think it could make for a pretty good indirect Hacker. Its loadout is pretty solid. The fact that it has a submachine gun, an emitter, and a fast panda, assuming those things work similar to how they do in N4, I think that's pretty good for only 16 points and half a SWC. We also have the Forward Observer, which is pretty standard. It's interesting to me that the Paramedic and Forward Observer are pointed the same, so that definitely actually makes me feel pretty good about it. That means I won't feel bad about having like a single Paramedic and a single Forward Observer, and I won't feel like I'm sacrificing points that way. And then obviously you can have probably what will be the cheapest lieutenant in the army, which is the Finic Lieutenant. I do believe that it's going to be fairly hard to hide that lieutenant unless you just bring a complete decoy model in the army that's the same loadout. So it could be a little bit advertised, and so I don't know if I will do that a lot, but until we see what other units in the army are allowed to be lieutenants on top of what we already know, that's probably going to be my starting point on who I use as that. I do want to give a little bit of a shout out to the HMG Finic, but my biggest issue with the Fusiliers moving into the N5 is that you'll probably never see a ballistic skill 15 Fusilier before applying range mods ever again. Since we only can get up to +1 ballistic skill added onto our actual stat from fireteam bonuses now, I definitely don't know that I want to find myself having to use a Fusilier as an active turn piece. I'm mostly planning to use this as a defensive fire team, and then maybe including 1 to 2 models in the fire team that can actually do some work in active turn. So we'll see how that goes. Let's go and move on to the next unit. So we also have Banshees. That's going to be our drop troop that's included in the Sandtrap box. So what I'm seeing the Banshees mostly being good for is being a flanking backfield unit that also has specialist options. So to me, it feels almost similar to if I were using an Ectremoy in Steel Phalanx, kind of being a very similar role to that. It's not as good of a gunfighter as something like a Tiger Soldier is in Yujing, but I definitely think there's still a place for the Banshee. I'm not going to promise that it's going to be something I go for every game, but I think with its abilities and its loadouts, it could be warranted at its point cost. I feel like its point costs are fairly low, but I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it doesn't really have mid-range or long-range gun options. So, some of the strengths that I think it will be potentially very good at is that I think it's going to probably be one of your better expendable midfield hunters in the list. I do not feel bad about dropping in or walking in on the edge a Banshee to take out a really strong specialist that's hanging out in the midfield causing me problems. Like if I'm worried about a hacker that's just kind of hiding out in the midfield to mess with my tag, I have zero issues dropping in a Banshee to try to take it out before I move my tag up. So I definitely think he has his uses. So he could be very useful. Some of the weaknesses I think on the Banshee is going to be the fact that it's definitely has no business being in close combat. And then also the fact that it doesn't have any kind of mid-range or long-range gun option is a bit of an issue for me. I think that all of the possible profiles you could take for the Banshee are about as warranted as each other depending on your points. If you're leaning toward a specialist, obviously it's hacker or bust. But I actually am curious about how good the Wild Parrots and other perimeter weapons will be in the new edition. So I feel like the Banshee could end up being a bit of a sleeper. All right, now let's talk about what I think is going to be one of the most important and one of the staple units of the army. So the Black Air is pretty awesome. I've seen 2 different things on the availability for Black Air at this point. On the full roster, I believe it said Black Airs were AVA 2, but here on the more recent spoiled graphic from the OnTabletop reveals, it's only saying AVA 1, which is not a super big deal. I think with the points of a Black Air, you probably are not going to want to take too many expensive medium infantry. So I definitely could see only using 1 being fine. But man, is it a house. It's probably, in my opinion, the best ARO piece in the faction. We'll see if that stands up, but currently that's where I'm leaning with it. But then it also can be versatile because if you go with the parachutist deployment zone option, the killer hacker, I think that could do a lot of work as well. So I think there's a lot of units that we've seen so far for this army that play similar roles though. So I think we're gonna have a hard time picking between them until I've had more practice with the army. The strengths of the Black Air are obviously that its gear and skills are both very, very strong. The fact that we have a Mimetism -3, MSV2, Combat Instinct, Neurokinetics Multi-Sniper as an ARO piece is just outstanding to me. I'm envisioning using him as part of my Fuselier 5-man core team and just having him be the main gunfighter in that team. I'll probably keep the Link team from breaking by having a hidden Fuselier be prone, be the actual Link leader, and just having everybody else be an ARO threat. So that's what I'm envisioning early on, at least, until I get a couple games in with the killer hacker Black Hair and see if I like it better. I think it's worth at least slightly mentioning the other fire team options, the hacker and the forward observer. I feel like they just fill holes. If that's something you need in your army, you could take that version, but I almost feel like you're doing yourself a disservice if you're not taking the sniper or the killer hacker. Worth mentioning is that a Black Hair is only a medium infantry, so he only has 1 vitality before he goes down. And he also doesn't have shock immunity. So that is a little bit of a concern to me as a potential gunfighting piece. Again, I'm intending for him to mostly be an ARO piece as opposed to an active turn piece. So that should play a factor in how you use him and whether you expose him to too many things. I feel like I could rant about this guy all day long, but until we've played with him, there's only so much we can say, so let's move on. All right, so the Scarecrow. Very excited about the Scarecrow. I think he could be outstanding, but I also don't know how many lists I'm going to be comfortable fitting him into. But I do think I'm going to end up preferring to include a Scarecrow over a Banshee in the long run. So my main comparison for the Scarecrow is I see them as the Pano Ninja. Like, to a T, I almost feel like it's the closest thing Pano's going to get to an actual just ninja profile. Obviously, some of the previous Pano versions could take the Kunai Solutions Ninja, but that's I could rant about how much I don't like the Kunai Solutions Ninja in my Imperial Service Army, so I don't really want to get into that right now, but I definitely feel like this is an upgrade over that type of profile for sure. And the fact that it's hidden deployment, mimetism -6, has camo, can reuse its surprise attack based off the camo, and has terrain, total, and stealth, this guy's solid. Now, whether or not he's just straight up busted is probably based on how good the silenced pistols are, because the rest of his normal equipment is just solid. I like a lot of the profiles. He has 2 different specialists, he has hacker variants or forward observer, but then he also has AP mines as a mine layer, and that is something that I'm really into. Considering the fact that I'm already ordered my Tick Belong to play with this army, the fact that I might need a couple extra ways to crack armor makes me really, really like the option of including the Scarecrow with AP mines. I do want to give a slight shout out to the deployable repeater loadout on the Scarecrow. That's the only one, well, I say only one, that one in the mine layer are the only ones that aren't true specialists, but I feel like if you end up trying to do a hacking-centered game plan with this army, that the Scarecrow with deployable repeater is a must. It's probably one of the only ways to get a repeater farther up the board with this army without having to just manually move remotes. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our next unit. So there's some things we just can't reasonably discuss about the Scarecrow yet. All right, so next up we have Orc troops. Okay, awful joke, I apologize. So we have the Griffin. The Griffin, in my opinion, is definitely an upgrade on the standard Orc troop, but I'm wondering what it will mean for Orc troops in the other armies. So in N4, we had what was basically the sectorial themed versions of Orcs, and obviously the Griffin has replaced that in KCF. So I'm wondering what will be the future of Orcs moving forward in the other sectorials based off that. So Griffins have quite a bit of what I would call kind of the typical Pano heavy infantry stat line. We're looking at ballistic skill 14, so top of the notch ballistic skill. Movement's great for heavy infantry. CC not so great. Our physical's not bad. Our willpower is Pano average. And then our defensive stats are not bad either. We're allowed AVA 2 on Griffins, so we'll see how that plays out. That definitely means that you can't there's definitely no option to do a 3-man pure Harris with them as a Kestrel team, so I guess that answers that for us. And one thing I will point out is that while I like the skills of a Griffin better, we're a little lacking on the profiles compared to an Orc troop, in my opinion. The HMG and the Feuerbach, both great guns. Honestly, I don't know if I would have taken a different sport weapon loadout if it was on the Griffin to begin with, so I'm definitely okay with those. But the fact that I feel like I'm pigeonholed into that or taking a very subpar multi-rifle is a little disappointing. I would like to at least have the option of a slightly better no support weapons costs profile, but we can't have everything we want. The HMG being the only lieutenant option is probably fine. The fact that it gives you a slight discount taking him as a lieutenant is not bad at all, because he's someone who can probably actually leverage the lieutenant order, but not if you're trying to put him in a defensive Finnick fire team. So we'll see where I end up finding the best home for the Griffin. That's really all I have to say about the Griffin currently. His we'll see how good jump 8 inches is. Once I see, I've watched the OnTabletop battle report between Killian and Carlos and saw how they use the jump skill, but I definitely would like to see some more rules clarification to know exactly how that works, and then I'll probably be able to give you a better assessment of what I think about the Griffin. All right. So that covers the different unit profiles that are included in the actual Sandtrap box. So let's talk about where to go from there. So since I'm planning to start playing this army a lot once it comes out, I'm going to share with you my game plan. So the first thing I did was when I ordered my Operation Sandtrap, I also ordered a Tick Belong, because I think having either that or the Squalos in almost every single list I play with the army is just going to be a thing. So obviously, I feel like we're definitely going to need some of the remotes that you have access to in Pano. I think that the drawn bots and the arm bots will be most important, but I also think there's going to be a lot of warranted in consideration for the Evo Hacker Mule bot. I don't know that I'm ever going to bring a baggage bot besides that, unless I just decide I want to throw one in for mission purposes, but I definitely think that things like the arm bots and then the especially the Pathfinder drawn bot, which is a wild card, I think those will serve a lot of good purposes in the army. I definitely am planning to pick up both of the named Fuselier characters. I think they're going to be staples in the list. I think most lists will include at least one of them, if not both, that I make. And then I eventually will pick up both of the Aleph allies. I think Dart could be outstanding, or it could just be a too expensive Scarecrow. So we'll see how that goes. Maximus, I'll pick him up because I have an excuse to play him being in this army, because it's my first army I've played that he's allowed to be in, but I'm definitely unsure of whether he'll end up taking the spot of one of the main tags. I can't imagine including him and one of the other tags in a list at the same time. That seems kind of excessive. And then I'm planning to also pick up the support pack, but it's mostly just for the machinists and the palbots. I'll explain to you my actual probably intention of the palbots on our next part here. So, this is something I'm very excited about. We already know what's coming in the Beyond Sandtrap box, and we're getting 3 of the other brand new units for the army: the Firefly, the Blink Team, and the Hetkari. So I have put together a list of what I would like to see some of the profiles be for each of these units, and obviously this is entirely speculation. I have no proof of any of this except for the dossier photos that you see here. The first one I want to talk about is what I want to see from the Firefly. So I'm expecting it to be a medium infantry based off its availability and loadouts. So I'm really hoping that it's going to be almost like a Pano version of a Yamao, in that it will have Armor 2 and BTS 6 is what I'm hoping for. Obviously, we already have been told that it's going to be an engineer, and its loadout further supports that. I'm hoping that every version of the Firefly has access to the decharges and the shock mines, and then the sculpt that we're actually getting in the box is going to be the Combi Rifle Panzerfaust sculpt, so I'm expecting that to be the 0 SWC kind of basic version of the troop. And then I'm hoping that there will be a mine layer version, and then also we know it will have a heavy rocket launcher loadout, and so I'm estimating them and hoping that that's going to be around low 30s in 1.5 SWC. I think that will help fill out your list whenever you're first building the army, but I'm definitely looking forward to trying to do some Kestrel fire teams that would potentially include 2 Fireflies and then another gunfighter, or potentially some duos with like the heavy rocket launcher Firefly plus a drawn bot. So we'll see how that goes. Next up, let's look at the Hetkari and what I'd like to see from it. I hope it's the centerpiece I want it to be. After being a little underwhelmed by the Griffin profiles, I'm hoping the Hetkari makes up for that. So the fact that the Hetkari, I believe, was only AVA 2 across the entire roster, I think he's going to be a very, very strong gunfighter. We've heard and heard again that there's going to be so much visor access in KCF, and so I'm hoping this is going to be one of the other MSV2 options that we have access to. What I'm secretly hoping for is that Hetkari is really just a Pano Shin warrior from Yujing, the Emperor's Guardians. Obviously, he has to be a little bit toned down from that, because lore-wise it wouldn't make a lot of sense to make him quite that strong. So I'm hoping that the fact that his loadouts are a little bit worse automatically causes that to be a thing. but then I also don't think he'll be as good in melee as the Shin Warrior. So the loadout of the Hetkari that I think is in assumingly the basic version is going to be the multi-red Fury version. That is the sculpt that will come in the box. So I'm hoping that that's probably roughly around 48 points and 1 SWC, and I'm hoping that's the version that gets the breaker pistol that he has for a close range gun. This might just be wishful thinking, but I'm assuming the missile launcher and submachine gun that is pictured in his dossier photo will go together to make the other profile. I expect it to be slightly more expensive because something like a heavy infantry with MSV2 and a missile launcher is probably pretty terrifying. So I assume that it probably was around a baseline of needing to cost at least 50 points for that. I looked at things like the Aquila Guard and the Swiss Guard to decide where I thought he would fall points-wise, and to me, it felt like he would be less points than the Shin Warrior, but more points than something like a Knight of Justice or like a Knight of Santiago. So that's kind of roughly where we fell. Again, I should mention that I am hoping he'll end up having something like a Combat Instinct tacked on as an extra skill to make him feel different enough from the Griffin, in addition to having some kind of optics. Okay, so the last and what I think could be one of the most interesting units in the box is the Blink team. So we know and have had slight hints from the reveal video that he's going to have camo. So even in the dossier picture, it looks like he's wearing some kind of camo cloak. What I really want him to have is nanoscreen, but I don't think he'll have that. I'm assuming he's going to be a camo unit that has access to surprise attack and some level of mimetism. Since the Scarecrow already has mimetism -6, I'm assuming he's only going to get something like a -3, since he also has access to camo and surprise attack, which to me makes him feel almost like a Hundun from Yujing. So that's roughly around where I'm kind of seeing him fall when it comes to points and abilities. So the Blink team, his weapon options pictured is that he has access to an assault pistol, which I'm assuming is on every profile, just so you guys know. I didn't include it in my speculation here, but I'm assuming we're looking at high 20s to low 30s for his different loadouts, and due to the fact that he's probably going to have pretty typical camo medium infantry stat line, he's pretty likely to be not the cheapest guy on your list. Do I think he's going to be worth including? I hope so. The model looks super cool with that heavy rocket launcher sculpt. But I'm definitely worried that he's going to basically get cut for a second Scarecrow, or just for the Scarecrow in general, like 90% of the time. So we'll see. I definitely don't think we're going to be hurting for support weapon options in this army. So we'll see how it goes. So this is what I'm thinking in terms of what these guys are going to be like. Probably spent way too long ranting on them right now, but I think they're all three going to be pretty good and very usable options in the army. So I'm very excited to hear when we're going to be getting this release. All right. So one of the last things I want to share with you guys is my speculation of what my two first tournament lists will look like with this army. So I'm definitely going to have a very tag-focused list as my primary list. I do not yet know if my main tag will end up being the Tikbalong or whether I will use the Squalos more due to him having that multi-HMG as opposed to regular HMG. Maybe we'll get slight different gun options for them in N5. I'm not going to hold my breath though. I'm expecting to use a probably 3 to 5 man Fusilier defensive team in that tag-focused list. Currently, I'm thinking I'll probably use something like a Fusilier Lieutenant, a second basic Fusilier, a Fusilier Hacker, a fourth Fusilier as a Paramedic, and then a Black Air as the fifth man of that fire team. That way I can get access to that +1 ballistic skill, but I'm probably going to be less concerned about the access to that 6th Sense buff from the fifth man pure, since these guys are going to be hanging out in my deployment zone probably like 90% of the time. So I'm intending to have my first duo with the tag be that it's paired with the Bullets-Here. I think it's a pretty good option since it will give me access to hopefully some more template weapons. I'm hoping it will keep that mimetism -6, and then also hoping it will keep the same speed as the tag. So I'm hoping that will end up being a pretty good duo. And then I'm also intending to do a second duo in the list of a Firefly with a Pathfinder. There's a chance if the points don't work out that I'm going to end up going Firefly with a Palbot instead. So we'll see how that goes. And hopefully the points work out where that I can have the full Pathfinder remote as the duo with the Firefly. I'm intending to have this list be fairly remote and tag focused, so I've also included the Peacemaker to be hopefully still a midfield option, and then also the Evo Hacker Mulebot to go alongside with those guys to either protect my tag through Firewall or to allow it to buff the Peacemaker or the Bulleteer. And then I am expecting to probably use a Machinist with a Palbot to have a second Engineer option with how remote and tag focused this list will be. And that's kind of the main pieces. I'm hoping that all the points and everything line up where I'm able to have that be the main usable pieces in that list. So that's what I'm thinking for a tag-focused army with the new KCF. I'm also thinking that an infantry-focused list could be good, but it might be inferior to the tag options. But what I'm expecting to do early on is to play a very Hetkari-focused list. I'll probably proxy it with my Shin Warrior from my Imperial Service whenever we first get the new stuff. That way I can start testing it out to see if I like it. But I'm envisioning a Harris team where I have a level 2 Purity with a Hetkari, a Firefly, and Bipandra. That way she can pick up the Hetkari or the Firefly if they get dropped. I think that could be a really strong Harris team. At level 2 Purity, you're getting the pseudo +1 burst while still having access to 3 different guys, and I think that's pretty strong from a Harris team. I'm intending to keep a Finnick core in that type of army list, but I'm planning to do something spicy and bring the Black Air Parachutist. So instead of having the Black Air in the 5-man Finnick core, I'm intending to use the Griffin with the Feuerbach instead. So I have that be my main ARO piece outside of the Richard Quinn, which I'm expecting to use in a lot of my more dedicated defensive Finnick teams. And that's really all I have to share currently about what I'm thinking on the list. There's only so much speculation I can do on the list at this time until we know the points of the rest of the units that we haven't seen yet. So we'll see how that goes. We do know that the models included in the Operation Sandtrap box have loadouts that add up to exactly 3 SWC and 150 points. So you can kind of think of the Operation Sandtrap box as like half of your first full army of the sectorial, and then you just need to fill it out from there if you're wanting to start it whenever the army first launches, which is my game plan currently. So I'm looking forward to sharing more with you guys about how my experiences go with this army moving forward. And as soon as we know more, I'm planning to start testing and using this army. I will share with you guys when I get my stuff from my Operation Sandtrap box and let you know what I think. So thank you guys for sticking with me so far today in the video. I feel like I've gone on long enough and I'm starting to get into ramble mode. So I'm going to go ahead and let you guys go with some final thoughts. So some of my next few videos are going to be discussing with you guys what I'm planning to do for my Steel Phalanx and my Imperial Service for N5. I'm planning to do some how to play, very beginner content whenever we get the rules dropped for N5. And then I'm also going to do a review of the JSA half of Sandtrap. One of my local players that I play with quite a bit, he is a dedicated JSA player, and he was my opponent in my recent battle report video that I put up, and I'm definitely planning to get some input from him before I do that part of the review, so that'll be a little bit longer to get out than it took me to get the Kestrel Colonial Force project done. And then I'm also planning to do a painting project update video for you all soon. I do a lot of that over on my TikTok, but then I also would like to share some of that with you on YouTube eventually as well. If you guys would like to see any specific Infinity content or anything related to my painting projects, please let me know, and I'll try to find some time to fit that in. I do want to shamelessly plug my Buy a Coffee link if you guys have been enjoying my videos so far and would like to further my ability to stick with these projects and be able to keep bringing you more content. Thank you guys for your time, and look forward to talking with you guys more next time.